Hi, my name's Vesna, and I spent 6 months sculpting a gift for my mother, only to find it the next morning, tossed in the trash between shrimp tails and soggy paper plates. But the worst part wasn't the garbage. It was what came after. The laughter, the silence, the lawsuit. They called it art drama. I called it 30 years of being erased, one polite insult at a time. Why did my own mother sue me for making something from my pain? And why did the rest of my family cheer her on? You tell me. They didn't notice when I walked in. Maybe they heard the screen door creak open. Maybe they saw me out of the corner of their eye. But no one turned. Not even my mother. It was my mother's 65th birthday, the big art world kind. String lights flickered over the porch. Crystal glasses clinked in orchestrated cheer. The entire living room had been cleared to make space for catered trays and curated opinions. People leaned in close, whispering about negative space and brushstroke confidence, like it meant more than any conversation that happened at my daughter's graduation. I stood for a moment, just past the door. Then my mother finally saw me. Her eyes landed on mine for half a second before drifting down to the box in my hands, wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with a navy silk ribbon. 6 months. I had spent 6 months sculpting that piece. Her birthday, her legacy, my offering. "Oh, you're here," she said, like I was someone's plus one. I smiled, quietly, the kind you make when you've trained your face not to expect much. I stepped inside and found a corner for the sculpture, near the sideboard, but out of traffic. I watched her float through the crowd, all silver hair and carefully chosen earrings. People laughed too loudly at her commentary on wine. One woman said, "Celestine, you're still the sharpest voice in Charleston." Mother tilted her head like a cathedral chandelier. Then she called everyone to the wall. "Come see what Colby made," she said. Colby, my nephew, 13, braces and all. He stepped up beside her with a beaming, dimpled grin. His gift was a crayon drawing, a crooked house, a sun the size of a ceiling fan, a figure with giant pearls. "It's Grandma!" he shouted. Everyone clapped. The drawing was already framed, already hung, right in the center of the living room, in the spotlight. "Look at the raw emotion," Mother gushed. "You can see his perspective evolving." I didn't interrupt. I just stood by the drinks table and poured myself a club soda, which I didn't drink. Later, after most of the guests had left and the energy dipped into that awkward post-celebration hum, I found her alone, wiping down the countertop. "Did you see my gift?" I asked softly. She didn't look up. "Oh, I haven't gotten to it yet. You know how chaotic it is." "It's right next to the sideboard," I offered. She waved a hand toward the kitchen. "Gregory baked the cake himself," she said. "Isn't that amazing? He's so hands-on now." Colby chimed in from the hallway. "Grandma said my picture made her cry." I forced a smile. "That's wonderful." She nodded as if the conversation was complete, then returned to arranging a leftover cheese platter into symmetrical rows. I thought about saying more, about the way my daughter Ivy helped me sand the sculpture after school, about the letter I'd written, folded and tucked beneath the base, explaining what this gift meant, about the time I took off work, the shows I declined, but she hadn't asked, so I said nothing. Later, I found myself in the guest room, the one with stiff sheets and decorative pillows no one was allowed to move. I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing my coat. The sculpture sat in the corner, unopened, beside an empty champagne box. No bow, no tag pulled, no ribbon untied. I looked at my hands, clay under the nails, a tiny cut still healing near my thumb from when I dropped a chisel last week. I picked at it. Maybe she just didn't have time. That's what I told myself. But the next morning, I took out the trash, and that's when everything changed. I woke up earlier than anyone. The house had that sticky stillness it gets after a party. Glasses left half full, napkins used but not tossed, silence stretching across the rooms like a hungover sigh. The light coming through the blinds was pale, not golden. The kind of morning where you already know something is off, even if no one said a word yet. The coffee pot was empty. Celestine's favorite mug sat on the counter, untouched. I started tidying up, out of habit, not invitation. I cleared a tray of congealed cheese, gathered stray wine glasses from windowsills and tabletops. My mother hadn't asked me to clean. She never did. But somehow I always ended up doing it. I gathered a trash bag, mostly paper plates and cocktail napkins soaked in brie and red wine. I tied it shut and opened the back door. The screen groaned. The yard was quiet. No birdsong, no breeze. Just me, barefoot in my sister's old sweater, walking out to the trash bin like I'd done it 1,000 times. As I lifted the lid, something stopped me. A sliver of gray, the curve of a shape I knew too well. I dropped the trash bag onto the brick path. It was there, half buried beneath wilted lettuce, soggy birthday cards, and something pink I couldn't identify. Maybe shrimp or maybe shame, was the sculpture. My sculpture. The one I'd shaped over winter mornings and summer nights. The one with fingerprints still embedded in its lines. The one that had cost me sleep and breath and the last few threads of faith I had left. It wasn't just there. It was broken, bent inward at the base, covered in grease. A torn paper napkin clung to its edge like a flag of surrender. I didn't scream. I didn't even speak. I just stared at it, because my body wouldn't move and my mind couldn't catch up. My chest tightened, not like heartbreak, but like betrayal. It felt thick, dirty, like breathing in a lie I hadn't wanted to believe. Eventually, I moved. Slowly, carefully. I pulled the lid back fully and climbed in. It was deeper than I remembered. My knees sank into cold juice that smelled like forgotten fruit and soap. I reached down and tried to pull the sculpture free, but it was stuck between a champagne bottle and a takeout container. My hand slipped. I bit my lip as glass sliced into my palm. I wrapped my arms around the sculpture and pulled again. It groaned under its own weight, but gave in. When I finally lifted it out, a shrimp tail fell from the curve I'd spent 3 days sanding to perfection. Still, I didn't speak. Blood mixed with garbage juice on my wrists. My sweater stuck to my back. I held the sculpture like it might fall apart in my arms, or maybe I would. And then, Aunt Vesna? Colby. His voice cracked through the air like a slap. I turned slowly, still inside the bin. He was standing about 10 feet away, shirtless, holding his phone up like a shield. He squinted at me, then grinned. "Oh, man," he laughed. "Are you actually in the trash? Like, for real?" He tapped something on his screen. "Filming. I gotta show Mom. This is hilarious." I wanted to say his name. I wanted to tell him to stop, to turn off the camera, to walk away. But my throat locked. All I could do was crouch lower, shielding the sculpture with my body like it was a newborn instead of a ruined thing. He laughed again. "Dude, this is going viral." The screen door slammed open behind him. Footsteps, quick and heavy, moved across the grass. Ivy. I didn't even need to look. I could feel her approaching, could feel the moment her breath caught. She rounded the corner and stopped cold when she saw me. Her mother, inside a trash can, clutching a gift like a wounded animal. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to, because her silence said more than any scream ever could. Ivy didn't say a single word. She didn't scream, didn't ask if I was okay. Just stood there on the pavement, frozen, her eyes locked with mine for a second too long. Long enough that I knew she understood. All of it. The whole ugly scene. Then, without so much as a flinch, she turned back to the car, got in, and drove off. I climbed out of the garbage slowly. Every movement felt like it echoed. I was soaked, sticky, and cold, holding what remained of my sculpture. A warped mess now, smeared with banana peels, egg yolk, and the slimy tail of a shrimp clinging to one edge. But that wasn't the heavy part. The weight came from what the piece had once meant, what I'd let myself hope it might become. A small token of self-worth, of trying again, of risking belief. Inside the house, I peeled off my soaked sweater at the laundry room door, trying not to touch anything with my grimy hands. My shoes squished on the tile, leaving a faint trail of gray water behind me as I moved down the hall. The silence of the house pressed in on me, too clean, too undisturbed. Celestine was sitting at the kitchen table, stirring her tea like she had nothing on her schedule for the next 10 years. Her hair was pinned up neatly, not a strand out of place. She didn't even look up as I entered. "Is it raining out?" she asked, calm and detached, like she hadn't just dumped my work into the trash like kitchen waste. I didn't answer. I set the ruined sculpture on the marble counter beside her, with more care than I meant to. It made a soft, wet thump. Finally, she glanced up, raising one perfectly sculpted eyebrow, the way she always did when she was pretending curiosity instead of disdain. "Did you mean to throw it away?" I asked. My voice was quiet but steady. I wanted to be clear, not loud. She exhaled as though I'd asked whether the sky was blue or if water was wet. "Sweetheart," she said, setting her mug down without a clink. "No one asked you to make it." I stared, waiting. But there was nothing else, just that. She folded her napkin in her lap, eyes calm, tone almost gentle. "Not everything has to be a performance," she added. "Sometimes it's okay to just be. You don't need to constantly prove something." There was no anger in her voice, no regret. Just that sharp blade she always kept polished, disguised as reason, dressed up in good manners. The kind of cruelty you couldn't even call cruelty because it sounded so sensible. I didn't respond. I knew my voice would shake if I tried. She stood up, rinsed her mug, and left the kitchen like we just chatted about grocery lists. Like nothing had happened. Back in the guest room, I laid the sculpture on an old towel and sat beside it. I wasn't trying to repair it. That wasn't the point. I just needed something to do with my hands. I wiped off what I could, peeled off the bits of garbage, dabbed at the cracks with a paper napkin until the surface stopped feeling like trash and started feeling like clay again. Like something that had once held intention. Maybe not promise, but purpose. By late afternoon, I was in my car again. Not heading anywhere in particular. I didn't call Ivy. I didn't go home either. I just drove. Miles passed in silence, the hum of tires the only sound. It was easier to be in motion than to sit still with everything inside me. When I finally got home, I left my shoes by the door and poured myself a glass of water. Ivy's door was shut. No sounds, no movement. I didn't knock. Then, just after 8, my phone buzzed. Group chat. Family thread, do not delete. A video. I tapped. There I was, on screen. In the bin. Hair plastered to my head, clothes drenched, arms deep in garbage, dragging out the sculpture like some tragic raccoon at midnight. The caption, "Auntie the Raccoon strikes again." Laughter followed. A cascade of comments. Drew, of course it was Drew, posted a gif of a cartoon raccoon gleefully digging through a trash can. Someone else dropped a string of laughing emojis. And then the kicker. Art imitating life. Not a single voice called it out. No one said, "This is cruel." No one typed, "Take it down." Not even a single, "Hey, maybe leave her alone?" My thumb hovered over the reply bar. I could have said it. Could have written, "That was private. That was humiliating." I could have asked, "Do you know what she threw away?" But I didn't. I muted the thread, closed the app, turned my phone face down and left it on the table. Ivy's door was still closed, but I got up, walked quietly down the hall, and opened it just a crack. Enough to slide the now cleaned sculpture inside. I set it on her desk, where I knew she'd see it. Right in the center. I had scrubbed every shrimp stain off by hand. Every pass of the cloth had felt like something between defiance and a plea. Grace or desperation, I couldn't say which. I lingered for a second, then stepped back into the hallway and sat down on the floor, my back against the wall. I wasn't crying, just sitting, just breathing. The house was silent. So quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum and the ticking of the old wall clock. Time passed. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the ache in my knees to settle in. Long enough to see the light under Ivy's door flicker off. I stayed. I pulled out my sketchbook, the one I kept for when I didn't have words. And I drew. Not something polished. Not something to share or post or show anyone. Just lines. Hard lines. Sharp ones. Deep grooves in the paper. The kind that left impressions several pages down. By the time the sky started to lighten, I wasn't angry anymore. I was done waiting. Done needing anyone's permission to be seen. The sky was still gray when I heard the faint click of Ivy's bedroom door. I stayed in the kitchen, pouring coffee with one hand and wiping the edge of the counter with the other, pretending I hadn't noticed. Her footsteps padded softly down the hallway, and by the time I glanced over my shoulder, she was already in the studio. She didn't speak, but the light was on, and that was enough. I didn't follow her. I sat at the table, stirring cream into my mug, even though I don't take cream. My phone buzzed once. It was from Celestine. "Next time," the message read, "let me know before you decide to make something so dramatic. You've always been sensitive." No apology, not even a pretend one. Just that slick tone of correction she always used when I was little, coded with etiquette, sharpened with judgment. I read the message twice, then I deleted it. Not because I didn't care, but because I did. The rest of the morning dragged like wet laundry. Ivy stayed in the studio, and I left breakfast on a tray outside her door. It sat there untouched. By noon, I had moved to the couch, curled beneath the same quilt I'd brought with me to college decades ago. I picked up one of my old sketchbooks, one of the fat ones I'd filled during the year Ivy was born, and let it fall open near the middle. A folded sheet of paper fluttered to the floor. I bent down, picked it up, and felt the breath catch in my throat before I even opened it. It was a drawing. Mine. The paper was yellowed, edges curled like it had been shoved into something years ago and forgotten. Crayon, not graphite. A child's work, maybe 10 years old. A house, a tree, and a woman with long hair standing beside a girl holding something round in her hand. Clay, I remembered. I had drawn myself with clay. But the drawing was torn, ripped roughly through the middle, right where the girl's head should be. I didn't need to ask how it happened. The memory came back clear. I was standing in the dining room, excited, holding it up to my mother. Celestine had glanced at it and said, "Don't waste paper on things nobody will hang." Then she tore it and dropped it into the recycling bin before turning back to her dinner guests. I was maybe 9, maybe 10. Either way, I'd said nothing, just picked up the pieces. And here it was again. I sat back, holding the torn paper in my lap like something sacred. I traced the line of the tear with my fingertip, and the weight of it sank into my chest. Not just this one moment, but the 1,000 little ones that had led to it. Not a single act, but a lifetime of dismissal dressed in pearls and praise for someone else's child. This didn't begin with Ivy's sculpture. It didn't begin with the garbage bin. It began long before I ever knew to call it by name. A war of erasure, quiet, consistent, always polite. I stood up and took the paper to my studio. The sun had shifted by then, casting a diagonal line of light across the table. I laid the drawing flat, pressed it between the pages of an empty sketchpad to smooth the folds. Then I reached for the tape, clear, matte, nearly invisible, and began patching it back together. Piece by piece. Not to make it whole again, but to prove it had existed. After that, I pulled out the materials I hadn't touched in weeks. Charcoal, plaster, linen scraps. I wasn't planning anything. I just needed to move. Needed my hands to do something other than remember. By the time evening came, the table was covered with fragments, broken lines, torn sketches, a pile of shredded letters I couldn't bring myself to read. I didn't make dinner. Ivy didn't ask. That night, I swept the floor, wiped the table, and left the studio door cracked open for the first time in years. No invitation, no announcement, just open. By the time I padded into the kitchen, the sun hadn't quite climbed over the neighbor's roofline. The house was hushed, save for the low hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the floor beneath my heel. Ivy's light was still glowing beneath her door. I didn't knock. I didn't want to break whatever spell had brought her back to clay. Instead, I poured myself half a cup of coffee, walked to the studio, and paused at the threshold. She was there, shoulders hunched, arms dusted in white, her hands deep in the work. The sculpture was no longer the one she'd made, and no longer the one I had pulled from the trash. It had morphed into something altogether different. Torn sketches had been embedded into the clay, some of them mine, some I didn't recognize. Bits of paper curled out like scars. There were still food stains she hadn't cleaned off. She'd chosen to keep them. I didn't say anything. I just stood behind her, watching the rhythm of her movement. She worked like someone holding back a scream. Every press of her palm into the material was intentional. Like the only way to forgive was to reshape what had been ruined. I stepped out quietly and let the door ease shut behind me. Later that morning, I began gathering supplies. Not because she asked, she never did, but because something in me said, "Make space." So I did. Lighting, extension cords, a pedestal I'd borrowed from a former gallery show. I pulled a small digital frame from storage, wiped off the dust, transferred a video file from my phone. It was me, waist deep in the trash bin. I clipped the start, cut the sound, trimmed it into a loop of movement only. Just me, dragging the sculpture out of the waste, breathless and silent. I saved the file with a new name: Unwanted, Unbroken. Ivy came into the kitchen as I was coiling the last power cord. She didn't speak, just nodded at the pile of gear on the floor, then back at me. We didn't need to talk about it. Whatever this was becoming, it didn't need permission. That afternoon, I called May Hollis. We'd met years ago when she was curating a series of regional sculptors, and I was still exhibiting under the name my ex-husband had insisted I keep. We hadn't spoken in a long while. "Can you meet?" I asked. "Tonight?" "Yes." May's space was a renovated garage behind an old laundromat. Still smelled faintly of motor oil and turpentine, even after years of gallery walls and air purifiers. When I arrived, Ivy stayed in the car. I carried in the piece myself. May took one look and blinked, said nothing for a full minute. Then, with a breath, "Okay, we'll make space. One night, small room, no cards. Let it speak." We worked quickly. Ivy and I set up just before dusk. No title on the wall, no plaques. The sculpture in the center, looped video running in silence behind it. The only light came from a single warm lamp overhead, casting shadows that moved with the people. When the doors opened, a few familiar faces trickled in. Fellow artists, a teacher from Ivy's high school, a neighbor I hadn't spoken to since the pandemic. They paused. Some walked around the piece, slow. Others stood still and stared. The torn fragments of Ivy's letter, now hardened into the clay, could be read if you moved in close. "I made this for you. I thought maybe this time you'd see me." Ivy kept to the far corner, arms crossed. I stayed behind a pillar. I didn't want anyone to ask questions, didn't want to explain. I just watched. A woman leaned toward another and whispered, "That hit me right in the chest." Another took out a notebook, scribbled something, cried, quietly. Ivy never looked up, but her shoulders were no longer hunched. And just as the room settled into that quiet that only truth can create, the door swung open. Pearls, beige, glossy lips. My mother. She was dressed like she was attending a fundraiser, not walking into a room built on the ruins of what she'd chosen to ignore. I didn't move. Ivy didn't flinch. But we both watched her walk toward the sculpture like it had betrayed her. She moved with the same deliberate grace she'd always carried at gallery openings. Back straight, chin slightly lifted. A calculated smile meant to say, "I belong here more than you do." Her heels clicked against the concrete floor as she approached the sculpture. She stopped, not at the piece itself, but at the small digital frame beside it. The loop played. Me, inside the trash bin, pulling out Ivy's broken sculpture like I was rescuing something sacred. Her smile tightened. Her shoulders stiffened. But her voice? Her voice didn't waver. "Well," she said aloud, hands clasped in front of her, "isn't this dramatic?" Heads turned. Ivy didn't speak. She stayed tucked into the corner, expression unreadable. I stepped out from behind the pillar. Celestine turned toward me slowly, her voice calm, measured, like someone rehearsing for a deposition. "You planned this, didn't you? To embarrass me?" "No," I said quietly. "I planned it so she wouldn't bury herself the way I did." Her lips parted slightly. "You could have spoken to me, Vesna. Privately. You didn't need to stage this." I met her eyes. "I did speak. You just never listened unless someone else was watching." There was a flicker behind her eyes then. Hurt, or maybe just calculation. "You're putting your pain on display and calling it art. That's not healing. That's revenge." I tilted my head. "It's not about you." She barked a short laugh, brittle. "You didn't have to say my name. Everyone knows." A few gallery guests hovered nearby, awkward in their stillness, pretending to be interested in a different wall installation. May stepped forward, gently but firmly. "You're welcome to leave, Celestine, if this space isn't comfortable for you." Celestine turned toward her, with the same icy tone I'd heard since I was a girl. "This is slander disguised as sentimentality." May didn't flinch. "No, it's called truth." Celestine exhaled through her nose. "I should have known you'd side with them." With that, she pivoted on her heels and exited, her perfume lingering long after the door shut. Silence returned to the room. Not heavy, not tense. Just full. About 20 minutes later, a man approached Ivy. Clean-shaven, sharp suit, wire-rim glasses. I recognized him. David Harrow, a mid-level critic who'd been circling the regional art scene for years. He didn't introduce himself with flair. He just leaned toward Ivy and said, "This piece, it hurts in the right places." Ivy blinked at him, unsure if she should respond. He continued, "There's a show coming up. Emerging artists, real emotional work. We're tired of concept for concept's sake. We need something human." He reached into his jacket and handed her a card. "If you're interested, send something in." Then he turned to me. "You're the mother?" I nodded. "This was brave," he said. I gave a small shrug. This was necessary. He left without another word. Ivy stared at the card for a long time. I didn't push. I didn't ask. I just walked over and handed her a bottle of water and a small pack of almonds I'd stuffed into my bag that morning. She took them. Our hands brushed. She didn't speak, but the grip on the bottle tightened. People lingered in the space longer than I expected. No one asked about materials. No one asked for process or pricing or what it meant. They just stood. By the time we started packing up, the room was empty but still charged. May came over and crouched beside the pedestal as I unplugged the frame. "That might have been the best exhibit we've ever held," she said, voice low. I looked up at her. I didn't smile, just nodded. Ivy stood on the far side of the room, arms crossed, gaze steady. She was finally exhaling. 2 days later, my mother was the one screaming, not at me, but at the entire world that finally saw her. 2 mornings later, I opened my laptop to a string of unread emails and a subject line that stopped my hand mid-air. Art or betrayal? A family's silent war on display. The article wasn't long. A local culture blog had picked up a photo from the exhibit. Just the sculpture. The looped video playing in the background. No names, but enough details to connect the dots. A daughter's gift discarded. A mother's silence immortalized in clay. It spread like wildfire. By lunchtime, it had been reposted on 2 regional arts pages. By evening, strangers had turned it into stitched videos, TikTok breakdowns, and carousel posts about generational trauma. I didn't say a word. I didn't like, share, or comment. Ivy scrolled through some of it, quiet. When someone on Reddit wrote, "I don't know this family, but this broke something in me," she just turned the screen and said, "They don't have to know us to know." My inbox started filling. Not press, not criticism. Letters. One woman wrote, "I watched my daughter draw for 5 years before I ever framed anything. I hate how late I was." Another, "Thank you for making this visible, for refusing to swallow it quietly." I didn't respond. I just kept reading. But somewhere across town, my mother was unraveling. I didn't see it myself, but May forwarded me a voicemail Celestine had left on the gallery line. "You gave them a platform to humiliate me. Do you understand what you've done?" I pictured her in her kitchen, pacing in those beige heels that always pinched at the toes, but made her feel invincible. The marble island, the curated row of art books she hadn't opened in years. May had told me gently, "She doesn't want the work removed. She wants the story erased." I nodded. But that's not how stories work. Later that day, a neighbor texted me, confused. "Is your mom okay?" She was outside yelling into her phone, loud. Something about betrayal and image. Apparently, she'd thrown her iPad across the backyard. The landscaper said it shattered on impact. She tried damage control, started calling friends in the gallery circuit, people she used to trade favors with back when her column still held sway. She labeled the piece a distortion, claimed I'd taken a private family moment and twisted it for attention, said Ivy was manipulated into turning her pain into a marketing stunt. Some believed her. One smaller exhibit that had agreed to feature the sculpture next month pulled their slot. Quietly. No explanation. Just a shift in programming. But others reached out to me directly. A message from a gallery in Asheville. "If it hurts this many people, you're doing something right." Another from a curator in Baltimore. "We're tired of sterile. This is real." I didn't respond to them either. I wasn't looking for applause. I was looking for oxygen. That evening, Ivy showed me a Reddit thread titled, "When Narcissism Becomes a Family Heirloom." She didn't laugh. She just exhaled and said, "Well, that's not subtle." Then she added, "But it's true." She was working again. Not constantly, not obsessively, just steadily, quietly. Her hands covered in dust again, and her eyes calmer than I'd seen in months. Celestine, on the other hand, kept escalating. She emailed a podcast host, trying to spin the narrative. Claimed we were exploiting mental illness for sympathy. Claimed I had always been emotionally erratic, and used motherhood as a shield from critique. It didn't land the way she hoped. One of the hosts responded publicly, "If this is emotional manipulation, it's the kind that uncovers actual wounds, not invents them." Still, she kept going. She sent a formal letter to May's gallery demanding the sculpture be removed, citing defamation. May forwarded it to me with one line, "She's panicking." And I knew that, because for the first time, her name wasn't the one on everyone's lips. Mine was, but I didn't post a statement. I didn't write a clarification. Instead, I cleaned the sculpture carefully, wrapped it in linen, and placed it inside a glass display case I ordered from a local shop. No plaque, just one word etched discreetly onto a brass plate at the base. Recovered. The house was quiet that night. Ivy had gone to bed early. I sat in the studio, alone, staring at the sculpture in its new enclosure. It looked less like a wound and more like a monument. And just when I thought maybe the worst had passed, when I thought my mother would finally go silent, there was a knock at the door. A courier stood on the porch, holding a slim white envelope. The return address, Wakefield Legal Associates. The envelope sat on the counter for almost an hour before I opened it. I poured a cup of tea. I stared at the mail slot like it had just delivered a small bomb. Ivy walked past it twice. Didn't ask. Didn't need to. I finally slipped a knife under the flap and slid out the papers. The letterhead read, Wakefield Legal Associates. 2 pages of legalese, printed double-spaced and sealed with her signature. My mother was suing me. The wording was theatrical, as always. Terms like unauthorized use of familial identity, co-authorship of thematic narrative, and monetary restitution for reputational harm. In short, she was claiming that since the sculpture and the exhibit depended on the legacy of our relationship, she was owed partial credit and payment. Ivy stood at the sink, reading over my shoulder, her mouth slightly open. "She actually said you co-created the emotional engine of the work?" she asked, baffled. I nodded and folded the letter carefully. She just proved every word I never said. I didn't yell. I didn't rant. I didn't text May or call a lawyer. I made lunch instead. Ivy didn't eat much. She sat in silence, twisting her fork in a bowl of rice like it might spell something if she moved it long enough. Later that night, I sat in the studio and stared at the glass case. The sculpture looked different now, not just recovered, but weaponized, not by me, by her. She wanted to own even the grief. That night, I remembered the call, not the one last week or the week before, but the one from 2 weeks after the first show, before anything had gone public. She had called, voice already rising before I'd said hello. "You don't get to make me the villain," she hissed. "Do you think people care about your sad little clay pile if it weren't about me?" I'd held the phone at arm's length. "You're nothing without me. I gave you that pain. I made you visible." The line went dead before I could speak. I hadn't answered, but I'd recorded it. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I ever thought I'd need proof, but because some part of me, maybe the daughter who still needed to hear her own memories out loud, needed to know I hadn't made it up. The next day, I started building something else. I didn't call it an installation at first. I just needed space. I cleared a corner of the garage, painted the walls charcoal gray, blacked out the windows. One stool, one light, one speaker. The piece was called Residual Echo. The only audio was a loop of her voice, filtered just enough to sound like it was coming from another room. From a hallway you never wanted to walk down. "You're only visible because of me." Silence. "You think people care about you on your own?" Silence. "You owe me." Then Ivy's voice. Layered, soft, from the letter she'd written the night of the party. "I made this for you. I hoped maybe, this time, you'd see me." In the background, the faint sound of clay cracking. Then the loop started again. The first night we tested it, a woman who'd walked in with a friend stayed seated for over 15 minutes. When she stood up, she was shaking. One man left early, said he felt like he was eavesdropping on something sacred. A critic from Atlanta wrote in his review, "It's the most violent thing I've ever heard whispered." Celestine's lawyer withdrew the case 3 days later. No apology, no comment. Just silence. I didn't go public. I didn't release the audio file. I didn't name names. When someone from a local art magazine emailed me asking for a quote on how you chose to respond to a lawsuit from your own mother, I replied, "I made something." That was it. And the final call didn't come from her. It came from someone I never expected to hear from again. I picked up the phone and heard a familiar voice, dry, clipped, always half an octave away from passive-aggressive. "You really think you can just cut this family off and be fine, Lorna?" I pressed the phone between my shoulder and cheek while drying a plate. Ivy had just left for class, and I wasn't in the mood to play diplomat. "You really think you can just cut this family off and be fine?" Lorna's voice came sharp, like she was biting into something bitter. I set the plate down. "No," I said. "I think I had to stop pretending it wasn't already broken." She scoffed. "This was private. You made it into a spectacle." "What you call private, I lived. Every day. Quietly. You know what people are saying now?" She went on. "Do you know how many calls Mom's gotten? Emails? Friends refusing to speak to her?" I leaned back against the counter. "Do you know how many years I waited for a single 'I'm proud of you'?" There was silence on her end. Not the kind that meant she was considering it, just the kind that meant she'd run out of clever things to say. Before she hung up, she threw in, "Just remember who fed you when your art couldn't." That afternoon, a mass email went out from Uncle Rick. Subject: Family Unity Matters. It was the kind of message that pretended to be neutral, said things like, "Let's remember what matters most," and "Our parents did the best they could." The kind of message that was never sent when someone needed defending, only when the truth had become too loud to ignore. A few cousins unfollowed me on social media. Some blocked me outright. Colby, of course, posted a meme. A raccoon holding a clay sculpture in its paws, with the caption, "Guess she made it into the MoMA next." It got 5 laughing reactions and 1 ouch. Ivy saw it first. Didn't flinch. Just said, "He learned it somewhere." Then she quietly left the group chat. Deleted it from her phone without ceremony. I didn't follow up. I was done teaching lessons to people who'd already decided they knew better. A few weeks later, I received an invitation to speak at a symposium. The subject, Art, Identity, and the Cost of Invisibility. It was an honor, one I would have wept over 10 years ago. But I didn't want the stage. I passed the invite to Ivy. When the day came, she wore a navy jumpsuit and pulled her curls back into a braid. She stood in front of a room full of strangers and said, "This isn't a story about triumph. It's not even a story about art. It's a story about survival." There was no applause, just stillness, eyes watching, a few hands folded tightly on laps. When she walked off stage, I was waiting near the side door. She didn't ask how she did. I didn't offer praise. We just stood in the shadow of the hallway together until our breathing found the same rhythm. On the way home, she dozed in the passenger seat while I drove. I didn't turn on the radio. I let the silence be soft for once. Later that evening, I went for a walk past the gallery, where my mother used to host her salon nights. The windows had changed. No more oil paintings, no more antique frames. It was digital now, bold colors, strange motion graphics, work by young artists I didn't recognize. None of them connected to her. I stood there for a moment, long enough for the chill to find my collarbone. Then I whispered, "To no one, really. I didn't win. I just stopped asking to lose." When I got home, the sculpture was still where I'd left it. Ivy had placed a fresh cloth inside the case. No note, no fuss. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down, let my shoulders relax. I didn't make this story to hurt her. I made it so I could finally leave it. Now I see myself. And maybe one day, Ivy won't need to sculpt the truth, because it'll be safe enough to simply live it.